am so excited to have you here. So I guess the best way to start out, if I were to just kind of sum you up, which I know is a dangerous thing to do to anybody, but if I were to like, if somebody said, well, who is Matt? What's he about? So, well, I would say that you are an expert in leadership, education, manhood, self-reliance, and also I would say that you're an educational disruptor. I think that's probably a pretty good description. So that's what I know of you.
Mm.
But what I want this audience to get is your perspective on kind of your journey, the path you've traveled. We have so many things that brother, this is going to be like iron sharpening iron. Just we're so aligned. And so, but you're the expert. You've gone before me. So I look at this as kind of like a yes, it's a podcast, it's an interview. I want my audience to know about you. I want them to know about all the things you're doing. But also for me, I want you to treat this as like a mini mentoring session. I mean, and I mean I say that humbly, and I say that as an act of humility because I'm so admiring of the work that you're doing. That's just kind of where I'm coming from on this. So with that, how'd you get where you are, brother?
Super grateful, man, truly. And the best thing I can say is I hope people just leave with more questions and answers. And that's really what I want it to be, right? I want people to leave with uh, a flame that's stoked for their curiosity, and maybe a little bit less fear as well, right? Like if we can do that, we're good. So, um, as far as getting where I am, I always tell people it started um, with figuring out that I was good at seeing patterns at 4 years old. Because where I am has everything to do with the few things that I'm good at, and everything to do with the many things that I'm horrible at. But seeing patterns was always one that I was good at, and so I figured out the game of school really, really quickly. That was one of the patterns that I figured out, and like many others, I thought, okay, figure out the game of school and life ends up working out well. And it wasn't long before I figured out that I can do well in school, but it doesn't mean you do well in life. Those are not the same games. And so it wasn't until I graduated out of college, turned down a job at the White House, um, and realized I had gotten straight A's, since I was 4 years old, but had no idea who I was, no idea what I had to offer the world, no idea what my gifts were, no idea what I was really, really excited about other than sports and girls at the time, right? As a young 20 something year old guy. So I had to figure it all out at that point. And then the process of just working some odd jobs, I quote unquote started to figure out before I even figured out myself, I started to figure out wait, other people are playing these games too. There's actually a lot of games going on here. I worked these odd jobs, ultimately landed at Stanford University, and I saw the games being played. I saw young people who were, again, really, really smart academically, but they were struggling in every other area of their life. I saw the game of admissions and realized, wait, this isn't the meritocracy that people said it was. And then I started, naively trying to fix things from the inside out, and saw games being played at other levels, saw games being played as a public school teacher, as a public school administrator, as a private school teacher, as a private school administrator. And all those things ultimately led to me coming on this journey of self awareness, and getting to this crossroads where the self awareness met the understanding of all the games. And I also had children and went, okay, well, they're not going anywhere from an educational standpoint that I didn't build. Um, so I guess I better figure out how to build something, and that's where it all really started. So built a bunch of schools, continuing to build schools, partnered with my friend Tim Kennedy to start building out, mentorship programs for men and young men around the world. And we're launching another 100 schools in 2024. So that's a whole lot in a short amount of time. But I'm glad to go anywhere and everywhere within that journey.
Yeah, so I don't think this audience needs a big kind of like, well, so what's wrong with the
Yeah.
educational system as it exists? And one of the things I like that you've said, I've watched you in a number of interviews, and you make a very strong point of saying it's not all educators, it's the system.
Mhm.
And here's one of the things as I was listening to one of your TED Talks that occurred to me. So we know post-industrial education was essentially created to educate people to go into a factory, right?
Mhm.
And you correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, but it's essentially, to basically create cogs for the big wheels that were out there to be productive. and what was going on. And now, at a time when 70% of all jobs are created by small business, we've got more opportunities for entrepreneurship than ever. There's never been a greater freelance workforce than in the history of mankind. But yet our education system is still stuck in, well, I want your take on this. I see that the system is still structured, masking almost as a post-industrial, get the cogs ready for the wheel that we'll plug them into. But also I see it placing such an emphasis on social, things that, things that don't have nothing to do with preparing a young person to go out and create and lead and organize. So as you set out to create your version of a 21st century educational system, what were some of the things that you started immediately saying, "Okay, I'm gonna whiteboard this, and this is what our schools will look like. This is what we will teach. This is how we will execute on this
Yeah.
plan." What were some of those things?
That's a great question, man, because what we have to understand is, and the way I like to frame it for people is thinking about it in terms of games, right? So if there's nobody in their right mind that would think, okay, if I want my young child to be a phenomenal basketball player, then what I need to do is really make sure they spend, 12, 16 years never touching a basketball, but we want them playing soccer all day, every day. Play soccer all day, every day because it's a game, because you have other people there, because you have a ball. And now all of a sudden, for 16 years playing soccer, they're a really good basketball player. If somebody said that, you'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why didn't they spend the 16 years playing basketball?
Right.
Right. Well, that's what we're doing here from that conveyor belt schooling standpoint is we're playing one game called conveyor belt school. And then at the end, we're saying, okay, great. Here's the game of life. And people are going, well, wait, these aren't the same. Like, this isn't the same thing. These aren't the same necessary skills. This isn't the same. Like, so that's where the disconnect is. So what we try to do is take that perspective and go, okay, well, what are the skills, kind of the meta skills that we need? What are the things that human beings actually need in order to thrive in this game of life? And that's not just what is the knowledge that we need, is what are the skills that we need? And we have to acknowledge therein that that skill set will, not might, will continuously change in some regard. The reality is you and I are talking on a platform right now that didn't exist 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It did. I got this cell phone right here, right? Where there's a beautiful woman that's coming in the picture. Right there. That's my wife right there. So we got that dude, 10 years from now, that thing is as good as a pager. It's
Mhm.
gonna be useless. So not only does learning now at this point mean I have been able to learn how to run many of my businesses from this phone right here. I also have to realize that 10 years from now, that phone's no longer gonna be relevant, and I've got to be willing to unlearn. So there's an element of adaptation. I have to know where to go find the information when that information is new and relevant. I got to know how to go access it. I've got to know how to either utilize it or find somebody else I can partner with that knows how to utilize that. And I got to create a network and we've got to collaborate around a joint mission for a joint purpose. And then we have to be willing to unlearn and untrain the habits that we have that no longer are relevant. Right. So we start talking about those kind of meta skills and going, okay, how do we build out solutions around this? There's a lot of collaboration involved. There's a lot of the ability to think that's involved. There's some self awareness that's in there. Self awareness just comes through trying a lot of different things. So we've got to make sure there's variety. Got to have self confidence. Self confidence comes through actually doing hard things and showing ourselves to be resilient, having this undeniable stack of proof behind us that we are who we say we are. So we have to scaffold in these experiences for self awareness and self confidence. A lot of buzz around mental health. Well, really, mental health is linked to physical health, especially for young people. It's the precursor for it. So we've got to take a look and go, okay, how do we integrate physical health and the actual knowledge of how can you be physically healthy? What does that mean from a food standpoint, like the nutritional standpoint, from the exercise standpoint, from the relationship standpoint, from emotional regulation to breathing to, any of the products we're using, the things we're exposing ourselves to or choosing to not expose ourselves to. We're looking at all of these things from a high level. and going, okay, how do we structure a day around that and make it fun? Because we've got so many other distractions that young people would rather take on right now. So how do we make that fun? And how do we get the families on board? How do we take it from a holistic standpoint when we say educate the whole child, right? And lifelong learning. We like to say the cliches. I'll tell you what, I've got a young person on my campus until 3 p.m. That's great. They go home to who?
Mhm.
They they go home to the parents. So if I'm educating the whole child, well, a big part of that education is the parents. And so that's not just let's filter and make sure we have the right parents. That's also how can I help the parents? How can I help them to grow? How can I make sure they're on a trajectory that's a hero's journey for themselves too? Because I don't want their job to be the overlord of this child's life. I want their job to be grow in your own journey and purpose and bring your child along with you. And by the way, we're just another, co-traveler on this, right? So we had to think through all of these relationships and set things up accordingly, knowing as time moves on, we'll have to change stuff, and that's okay. Right? So it's a big task, all while realizing that as you're launching all of this, you're going against the biggest religion in the country, which is school.
That's one of the things that I thought about whenever I was doing the, little research to get prepared for this interview is, okay, so whenever Tucker decided to take on the big 3 automakers at that time, that was audacious. But whenever you take on something that is, I mean, it is a religion. I mean, you look at the teachers unions and the power that they have over the White House and just everyday life, and the fact that the public education system is geared towards, I mean, it exists to train, young minds. The power and the power grabs and the fiefdom that exists in that, man, you're going up against a behemoth. One
Mhm.
of the things that occurred to me as you were talking, because it was a great prompt for a question I had for you, is that so we live right now in the most resource abundant
Yep.
time that humans have
Yep.
ever experienced. I mean, I love telling my daughters or anyone that'll listen how much better we live than the wealthiest humans in 1850. I
Yeah.
mean, just the middle class American lives better than a king lived, the king of France lived at one point.
Oh,
Napoleon never knew the luxuries and the ease of life we have. So resources are there. But what's happening, and I think this is what you're speaking to, is that we seem to be bringing up children that are less resourceful than
or
ever. And I mean, you talk about it, you're like, well, we need to, like mental health, that somewhere in mental health needs to be mental toughness, and we need to be able to battle resistance.
yep.
Yet what we're doing is we're raising up a generation of young people that are told, "You should never face any resistance, and if you do, don't worry, there's an administrator, a bureaucrat, or a politician that will come along beside you, and we will identify, demonize, and sterilize whatever that thing is that's making you feel bad about yourself." And
Yep.
it sounds to me like you're trying to combat some of that with
We're
what you're doing. Am I
we're
on the right track?
we're absolutely combating that, and there's this hidden secret, crew that is gonna get perturbed by this too, right? So you talk about the agendas and the unions and all this stuff going on in the schools, right? So what's happening is you've got this middle group, you've got the people that are like, "Nope, flat out, not happening. We're not engaging. We're gonna home educate. We're gonna go to an Acton Academy. We're gonna go to an Apogee school. We're gonna go to a Waldorf or Montessori." Like, great. You got that whole group over there. You got some people that are like, head in sand, buried it. I went to school. I turned out fine, quote unquote. I'm sure to be the same for my kids. I'm gonna send them there. You got this subgroup in the middle, and it's actually arguably the largest group there. And this is where I think is man, it's dangerous. And this is who I really a lot of times focus on trying to shake up. They're going, these agendas are not okay. This union's not okay. Like this is not okay. Schools need to change. It is not okay to mask my child. It's not okay to have all like I should be able to have more say into what the curriculum. These books are not okay. Go ahead, Jimmy. Get your backpack on. Grab your lunch. Go out there anyways. So there's the message there for those young heroes is what my parents say and what they do aren't the same, right? That my parents say things they wish they believed maybe. but they're still sending me here. So they actually still believe in this religion over here. And that is a dangerous spot because you're setting them up to be adults that go, okay, well, nobody actually really believes what they're saying, anyways. And so I just really ultimately, at the end of the day, it looks like not only can I not trust anybody because they're not saying what they think, what they really mean, I still need to just go ahead and blindly obey, authority. And man, talk about a recipe for a lack of resilience. So that's why shaking parents up, going, hey, you're a hypocrite, and I love you and I support you. And I know it's not easy at all. I get it. But also, you're being hypocritical and your kids know it too. Like that's a group to shake up. But everything we're doing on our side, again, I can point the finger all day long. There's a rule in our house that says no complaining, fix it. I can point the finger, I can show the problems. My responsibility is to provide solutions. Period. End of story. If it's worth me talking about, then it's worth me doing something about. And so that's what we're doing is building first and foremost in my house, building three resilient young people. Second, what can I build? What infrastructure can I build? Point people to the better alternative. So yeah, that's what we're doing through the mentorship programs and our schools.
One of the things I wanna ask you about that I love, I think I know the answer to the question, but being the good host, I gotta ask the question for for the rest of the audience. Why do you refer to the kids as heroes? Where does that come from?
Um, Comes back to Joseph Campbell's, the
Oh,
hero's
yeah.
journey. And that's a big part of it, right? Is the hero's journey. And that was something ingrained as I, used to be affiliated with Acton Academies. I've opened a number of Acton Academies. I'm a huge fan, huge supporter. So many people in that network are still dear friends and people that I speak with on a daily basis. So that's a big part of where it came from. But for me, there's a secondary, which actually may be the primary motivator. I'm very big on story. Um, what are the stories we look to? Humans have always spoken through stories. We've always learned through stories. We've found inspiration in stories. Um, and I think it's more important than we often give credence to. And my friend Seth Godin was somebody who pointed me into that direction, just kind of reminded me of that years ago. And I'm like, man, that's absolutely it. And, I think, and to not, I don't want to, I don't glorify the past and I don't want to sound like the old guy, but I think objectively, there were more stories that we told in a positive light. There were more hero stories generations ago. And I'm not even just saying when I grew up, I'm just saying generations ago, I think we pointed more to the people that had character, pointed more to the heroes that were saving the day, that were doing the right things in the face of obstacles, that were making the right decisions, even when the right decisions were the hardest possible decisions to make. I think songs where we sung about heroes more, or, we sing about even listening to some old like 80s R&B songs. It's like, talking about how much they love the women versus now it's like treating the women like objects, right? Like I think we just had this shift that's taken place over time. Um, and I think we have now put more vanity metrics on a pedestal. We put more victim mentality on a pedestal. We put more like even this. I know this is not a popular opinion freaking at all, but hopefully people hear for what I actually say. That popular song right now, the Rich Men North of Richmond or whatever that guy's name. He's a phenomenal artist, and he
Oh, yeah.
seemed like right. He seemed like an amazing freaking guy
Yep.
from everything that I've seen. I haven't seen a ton, but he seems like a really genuine guy. Like I look at him, I'm like, I feel like we would probably get along and probably have a lot of things that we agree on. But even the words of those songs, or that song, is he pointing out some real issues? Yep. But also there is an element in that song of just like, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I just don't subscribe to it, man. I just don't. I think that's another element of like, look, man, things suck, and that just is kind of the way it is. And I just can't put that kind of mentality on a pedestal. Your cards were dealt however they were dealt, good, bad, otherwise. Okay, now what? Like your moral obligation, if you are going to be an educated human being, your moral obligation is to grow. It is to get better in all the ways that you feel are important to get better. And that happens until you're 6 feet under. And that's what a hero does. So that's part of why I talk about heroes so much. I want that hero mentality to be made attractive again.
Brother, bring it. I mean, yeah, I love it. I mean, look, the motto of my show is improve always and always for that very reason. And it's one of the things that I just did a solo episode here recently talking about how, neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump can legislate your happiness, and they can't. And it's really bizarre to see how we've come to this place where politics and depending on people who don't care about you, don't know you, will never give two bleeps about you. Yet that's who we're going to put all of our hope and our faith in.
Really.
It's so beyond my understanding. And then it goes back to what we were just talking about. We've got the most victim-minded individuals at a time when we have the most abundant resources we have ever had, and it's like, okay, if you can't make it today, especially in the United States of America, if you can't make it here now in 2023, then what the hell do you think your grandparents did? What do you think your great-grandparents how could you imagine for 5 seconds? But then again, that would be asking the modern, especially young person, to take their eyes off their own navel for 5 seconds and look
Mhm.
to their
It's true.
ancestry, which that's something that I think this is one of the most narcissistic societies I've ever seen in my life, and we know what happens. Um, One of the things that I wanna shift to now because I see a crisis, and by the way, I asked you that on purpose because the hero's journey, I do think we're all in a journey, and we have and that's I think what you're teaching is that this hero's journey we're on, this action hero story that is our life, we get to hold the pen. We're in the director's chair. Granted, there's gonna the evil individuals or forces, they're gonna show up as part of the plot at some point.
Yeah.
But we have the opportunity to write in the script how we're gonna prepare to deal with that, and one of the things I know you're doing with I believe it's one of your boys, is taking jujitsu, so you're preparing a warrior not to go out there and start, you know, kicking people's tails via his jujitsu skills, but you're making a warrior out of this young man. Talk about how important it is to start raising young men that are warriors if need be in the right circumstances, the way John Wayne was, the way, John McClane once was. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, if we, the Frederick Douglass quote of "It's easier to raise strong boys than fix broken men." And
Amen.
I have always subscribed to that. And what we're talking about are different levels of sovereignty, really. So when we're talking about this, this warrior ethos and the physical component of this, we're talking about all levels of sovereignty. One of the things we're doing even with our men as we're going through our men's program is we get to take a look at every aspect of our lives and we start to pick it apart. And every month we take a different part of our life and we kind of pick it apart a little bit and we go, I'm not necessarily as far along as I thought I was or I'd like to be here. That is what is the common theme that kind of comes up. And that's not to shame anybody. It's just to go, okay, cool. Well, there's growth left because we've got this weird, and schooling is a part of it. It's not the only thing, but it's a part of it. We've got this weird thing where it's like we check off all these boxes and we're good. We see it a lot on the spiritual side, right? It's like people think, okay, cool, man, I got it. I'm going to keep going and I'm just going to go to church and I'm going to go do this. And it's like, all right, cool, man. But the reality is your knowledge of whatever your spiritual discipline is hasn't changed in 5 years. You haven't actually grown there. You say all the right things, you talk about all the right cliches, but you're not actually growing. Same thing on the physical side. We got a lot of men that are like, God, let's see, who do I quote? Let's quote Goggins, Jocko, Kent Mains, Nick Bear. So hey, go one more, stay hard, keep hammering, and discipline equals freedom, man. And everybody's like, yeah. It's like, but dude, your life is no different. Like you're not making more money, you're not giving more money, you're not serving at a higher level, you're not helping more humans. Your relationship with your wife hasn't changed and it's actually kind of going down. Your physical fitness isn't changing. Your right. So it's and by the way, 2020 happened and everybody ran out of toilet paper and the food and the went down and you had no idea what to do and you panicked because you're not actually sovereign because you're relying on somebody else for a paycheck. You're relying on somebody else to entertain you, relying on somebody else for your food sources. You're relying at some point, obstacles do come. That's inevitable. You don't know what those are gonna be. Man, shouldn't we be as prepared as possible? The physical fitness part of that, the combat part of it is just a it's just a piece of that. I hope I never get in another fight or altercation. I really do. I have nothing to prove to anybody. I've done it competitively and I've had it, as a knucklehead young kid. And I hope I never have it again. But I'll tell you what, if something happens and I've got to protect my family, gosh, it is good to know that you can, and not know it because you're armchair quarterbacking it, but knowing it because you've done it, you've practiced it a million times and you're actually proficient at it. I want the same thing for my young man. It's just a small component of his own sovereignty. And the men that have that don't have to prove anything to anybody, are usually the most humble people. They're usually the most kind because they're not itching to prove something, right? And so our efficacy as a leader grows the more capable we become, and the more capable we become in a dichotomy. What I mean by that is, and we talk about it in our circle as being able to be the savage and the gentleman.
Yep.
My friend John Lovell talks about it as the warrior and the poet. My friend Bedros talks about it as the savage and the servant. Whatever it is, it's this dichotomy. The more you're able to lean into the savage side, and the more you're able, and I'm talking like actually able, not think I'm able. I know I'm able. I've got a stack of irrefutable proof. I can lean into the gentleman's side. The bigger I can make the gap in between there, because I'm able to go so far this way if I need to, and so far this way if I need to, the more efficiently I can operate in life and the more impact I can have in a positive fashion moving forward. I think when those two things, I'm not good at either side, we have very limited impact. So I think the bigger we can make that dichotomy, the more we can help others.
I think that is so spot on. One of the things, and I as a Christian, for it's weird. It took me a long time before I really came to grips with the whole turn the other cheek idea. I just, I was like, yeah, I mean, I knew it
Mhm.
philosophically. I knew it. I knew what I was being taught, but it wasn't until I became an adult and I realized that turning the other cheek is is knowing you could destroy the other human being. You could slay them and choosing not to. And I think that's the problem these days is we're not raising up enough young men to give them the tools of a warrior. So then once they have the tools, then we can teach them how to properly steward them. And in
Well,
being able to steward those tools and resources they have within them, that's what really makes them, that's what gives them their power. And in my worldview, that's how you become Christ-like, to be able to be taking punishment, but you're taking it for such an enormous cause, in the case of Christ, for the saving of mankind, to be able to say forgive them.
well,
I could call on all of heaven right now, but in this moment, as the warrior who has to fight this battle on behalf of the mission I'm on, then I will turn the other cheek in this moment. And I don't think that we're raising up enough men these days to understand that if you can have the tools of a warrior, then all of a sudden you have to learn to steward them. And your education, that your curriculum, how are you starting to, I would imagine you take some of the principles of breaking down to then rebuild. What does that look like tactically? How do you start? And take it wherever you want to, Matt, either when you, with one of your men that are going through one of your programs, or the child. How do you start to instill that? I guess the best way to describe it is that purposeful warrior, that warrior that is able to steward that warrior-like mentality properly.
yeah, I appreciate it, and I wanna make sure I juxtapose part of what you just said for a lot of something that a lot of people battle. They'll use the turn the cheek. They'll use that as justification to just continue to be weak, not even worry about being capable, or I
Exactly.
am capable, but I'll still. Okay, so I always ask them, like, "Okay, what about Dode?" Right? Who is David is what we call him. His Hebrew name was Dode. Who is a God said, "This is a man after my own heart." God also had him slaying a giant as a young kid and going forward and chopping his head off.
Yep.
He was a warrior in every sense of the word, and God says, "He is my Gabor El," like my warrior of God. He is a man after my own heart. How do you that again, the the savage and the gentleman,
Mhm.
right? Got that dichotomy there. So people wanna lean into one area and not lean into the other. And so I like to get people to think about that and be uncomfortable in those thoughts because that's what we're supposed to do, right? Yisrael means to go to war with, to contend with, to wrestle with God, to contend with, meaning ask questions, meaning jump in and go, man, I don't understand it. And the vast majority of people at church will never actually do it. They like to say
Agreed.
they, but right, they just go, I'll point something out to them and they'll be like, Jesus. And everybody just goes, yeah. And I'm like, we didn't have at all. So, I appreciate that, the way to segue into that question. So, that said, there is an element of, look, we've got to break down to move forward. Now, there's less of an element. I think there's a couple of different things that I want to point out on this. One, that is easier to do, maybe theoretically in a physical environment. So like our live events, we can do a physical kind of a breakdown to build back up. And that can be effective. But in my experience, that's also effective only in a short term. Guys can come out of those experiences and definitely be changed, definitely be a better man for it, for sure. But also they need some other long-term self accountability. All accountability is self accountability. So they need some long-term structure that's in there. I also like to frame it with the fact that I believe we are born inherently curious. I think we're born inherently resilient. I think we're born inherently brave. I think a lot of these traits um, actually get trained out of us more than anything else. So, since I take that perspective, part of what we're doing with the young men is we're trying to preserve what I call factory settings as much as possible. We're trying to get back down to that factory setting model as quickly as we can, and there's not as many layers of BS to sort through. For the men, we're trying to get back to factory settings, and so there needs to be a little bit more of an element of breaking things down. And so all of that starts and ends right here in the mind, and so that's where we start for both of these, like the mentorship program side of it. We start by breaking down the physical or the mental constructs that we've got. So for young men, um, that first month that we deal with them, we want them read the recommended book we have them read is Do Hard Things. We want them to understand, hey, the word teenager wasn't even invented until 1944. Society has told you you are a boy and that you're going to be a boy for a long time. We don't buy that BS. You're a man right now, which means you need to take on man level responsibilities. We're also going to shift your language because words matter. So you're going to start by saying, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. And you're going to take a look and you're going to watch and see how people treat you, see what happens, see how people get uncomfortable. You're going to open doors for people. Let's see how people get uncomfortable. You're going to start leading the family meetings in your home because, hey, you're a young man, you're old, you're able to do that. So we throw them kind of into that mix right away. Oh, and here's some workouts too. If you're not like, I want to know what you're doing for physical fitness. If you're not, attending a CrossFit gym and going to jujitsu and kickboxing or whatever, great. We've got workouts for you that have been put together by freaking Tim Kennedy and a couple other Navy SEALs and a couple just some freaking bad men. So that's what you're going to tackle. So you make a pick, but that's what you're going to do because we want to shift immediately their psychology and kind of that operating system. We want to shake it to its core. That's the same for the men as they come in, but we do a deeper dive even into the stories they're telling themselves about the stories they're telling themselves. They go through and they burn, they write this breakup letter to themselves. They list all the things that they wish they were, doing differently, and they're burning it and they're reading these lists and these letters to their wives, to their kids. They're stepping into this extraordinarily uncomfortable situation from a mental standpoint, going, here's where I failed and here's where I need to change. They're building out their ideal, what Plato calls the forms, but it's their ideal. What's the ideal version of me as a husband, as a father, it's literally a mental breakdown so that they can rebuild and step into the newest version of themselves. That's month one.
I love that, and it's so cool, man. I knew this was gonna be an awesome conversation, and the good news is you're making me feel like, "All right, I feel like I'm on the right track." I mean, I just yesterday I released an episode, and it was, identity-based habits. If you've got to but you gotta determine what the ideal you is, and I think so few of us, we just kinda live in the matrix and let the matrix decide how we're gonna be formed. And we don't even take into account this ideal self. It goes back to we don't even realize that we have our own hero's journey. There's this arc that we're in, and we can take the pen, we can sit in the director's chair, we can be the producer, And that's one of the things that I'm so excited about. So to hear you say that, just it confirms in me that, all right, because that's what I want for men. And that's what
Mhm.
I want this show to be like with anything I do. And I have the Vitruvian Lab, which is my training, which I totally would love to pick your big brain on that because God knows I could use some help there. But one of the things that you said in that conversation that I think is just so amazing, factory settings.
Mhm.
Another way to say it, what we were freaking designed to be, who we
Bingo.
were designed, how we were created. And I think what happens, like a computer that's out there all over the interwebs, picking up viruses and crap,
Yep.
we take our factory setting self and we step into the matrix and we pick up a bunch of viruses and a bunch of garbage and a bunch of crap. And it sounds like to me, what you're doing is you're pulling these men and young men out of the matrix and saying, here, let's reset you to where you are. And let's walk through. So that's kind of the breakdown, the build up and some of the just here's where we're going to understand who you are as a man and where we want to help you build towards your own hero's journey. Now let's just talk about and man, I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, Matt. Is it apogee? Apogee?
Apogee. Yep.
Apogee. Okay, which is and so again, knowing the meaning of the word, even if I can't pronounce it in my beautiful East Texas vernacular, you know, that's obviously, the motto of my show. Whenever I started researching what you're into and what your mission is for that, I was like, oh, I gotta have him just kind of download this and let men know how they can be a part of this. So, kind of talk about the genesis of it and what goes on through the entire, how long it is, what's the course. Just give this audience an understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. So the genesis of it, man, I was running a number of these schools, these Acton academies in California, was launching multiple, and heard my friend Tim Kennedy on a podcast, and a lot of the listeners will probably know who Tim is. If not, look
Hmm.
him up.
Oh
It's
yeah,
Captain America, but in real life. Um,
exactly.
right, that's back your place. But more importantly, man, he's a really, really good husband. He's a really, really good father. He's a really, really good friend. He's just a really, really good human. Um, he said on a podcast, that ultimately he wanted to start a school, and so I said, "Hey, man, I know how to do that. I actually know how to do that pretty well. Glad to help you." Flew out to Texas. We got a workout in, which is code for Tim beat me up for a while. And we sat down and we started hashing out getting his school up and running. And in the process of that too, we started talking about, hey man, he's got a bunch of really good men in his network. I've got a bunch of really good men in my network. Um, let's do something that's just even extra above and beyond for young men. That's where it all started. It was like, what if we get young men that are kind of in that really, critical age of kind of that 12 to 18-ish range, and we just gave them a roadmap to tackle, that was going to provide all these things we were talking about: self-confidence and self-resilience and self-awareness, and all of these things. But we also put them in front of some of the best men on the planet. We gave them projects and challenges to build up the brand of them as well. So it's not only all this internal, but they actually had some external proof of the leadership journey they've been on, right? They have proof that they are who they say they are, and they can show it to somebody else and open up other doors. And oh, and by the way, you're just connecting every week with literally one of the best men on the planet. Not a bad deal. So we put that together. That's what it started as. So we're still both running, other businesses, multiple businesses. We start running this, wildly successful. Completely different reasons and all this, but I had the opportunity to give my Acton academies to my employees, and I left California about a year and a half ago, moved out to a farm in the mountains of North Carolina, and I was like, "All right, cool. Well, let's keep building on this Apogee thing." So one of the things we'd gotten from day one was a bunch of dads who were like, "Oh, I wish I had this when I was a kid. I kind of wish I had it now." Cool. Let's go. Let's get the men program going. So same thing on that side, 12 months, every month with a specific group of projects and challenges that you're taking on that's meant to highlight something in particular. It's got some very specific recommended readings, workouts, all that kind of stuff is in there. And then you're meeting every single week with one of the best men on the planet who is a ninja in a specific area, and you're in a private platform with all the other participants who are all going through these projects and challenges together. And so you're building out relationships as you move yourself forward in all these things. And it was very, very quickly, early on the young men's side, where we're getting young men who are now getting, six-figure job offers at friggin' 17. We're getting young men who we have a blanket scholarship offer, acceptance and scholarship to a university with, because the university president came on and was like, I will take any of these young men. Doesn't matter if you sign off on them, blanket acceptance and a scholarship off the top. Like, we want this kind of quality young man, at our university. Right. So we've got all of these things start happening on that side. On the men's side, I got all these wives reaching out like, "Hey, this has only been a month long right now, and already things are changing. Hey, what's right?" So it was a no brainer. So then we just started thinking bigger, at that point too. So we talk about Apogee as an organization, as the mission being reseeding. So again, getting back to those factory settings, reseeding a free and sovereign society through disrupting education for the entire family. So you got the hand of freedom over here that, you want to grasp freedom and sovereignty. All the young men was kind of that first finger, working on the young men in particular. Going to the men in particular was the next finger. Our women's program launches October 1st. So we got our women's program launching here. We will get our young women's program coming after that when we have some leaders that we develop here out of the women's program. So we'll have our young women's, and then we have our educational component. We got about 250 families right now that we're bringing through home education, what it looks like to do that well, not bringing school home, to actually home educate. And then we are partnering with people from around the world to launch K through 12 campuses, Apogee campuses, in their local community. So that's 2024. We plan on launching 100 to 150 K through 12 campuses.
Wow. So, nothing bold and audacious about those goals, my man.
Apparently, it's the way we roll, man. Yeah, for sure.
I love it. I think it's so cool. All right, so I want to ask you just a personal question now because and one of the things I think is funny. This is how I pick up on little things. I know you got the chess pieces behind you, and I got to believe those are indicative of the fact that we're playing chess. We're not playing checkers anymore. You play checkers, you get slaughtered, right?
You bet. Right. Yeah, you got, right, so you got the chess pieces over here, you got the man in the arena,
Yes,
Teddy Roosevelt, we got the sword back here. Yeah, we go to battle. We got this little guy over here who is, a bobblehead of somebody. It's Morpheus. We've talked about the Matrix earlier,
absolutely.
right? And so a lot of the guys have to and I one of the guys early on in our men's program said, "Hey, this is who you remind me of." And I can't say I took it as a compliment for sure.
Heck
And
yeah,
warm, but he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "You're a mix of Morpheus and Tyler Durden and Mister Rogers." And I'm like, "Cool, man. I'll take it. I'll
dude, that's a
take it."
sweet mix.
That's a
That's a
sweet
sweet
mix.
mix.
So, yeah. Mhm.
Well, it's interesting, and this is the reason why I bring it up because if you look behind me, so you can't see it, but behind me is a bust of Churchill, and there's also a lot of books.
Mhm.
And I don't think I don't think this is gonna be falling on deaf ears that, we don't read enough anymore to learn
Oh,
from those that went before us. Your buddy, Seth Godin, once made one of the greatest comments I've ever heard on the Tim Ferriss Show. Tim asked him what his favorite technology was. He said, "That's easy, it's books." He said,
mhm,
"For sometimes less than $5, you can literally take an
mhm,
entire genius's life work and consume it and learn the mistakes, the things that worked for less than $5." He said, there's no greater technology than a book."
mhm.
So, if I were to ask you, Matt, so, all right, I'm in. I wanna feed my mind. I know it's push-ups for my brain. I don't care if it's 1, 3, 5. I don't wanna set parameters. What books should I
Cool.
put on this shelf behind me if I don't already have them?
Holy moly. That in and of itself is one of the hardest questions for me, as somebody who is a voracious reader. And
I
it's
get it.
the you know what I mean? It's really hard. So what I always we have a whole list of recommended books that we go through with all of our programs. We have a whole another like honor list, and then we'll put in, we'll continuously add to those over and over and over again. So what I always go through when I answer a question like this is like, here are books that have impacted me at a high level enough to where I go back and I'll revisit them. because there are so many, and it changes what you need changes in the season when you need it a lot of times too, right? So people ask me a lot of times, "Hey, what's the best, what's your favorite book on parenting for, for my husband? I want to get him a book on parenting." Like, well, I don't have a book that's specifically around parenting that I necessarily love, but the reality is part of him becoming a good parent is him optimizing himself as many ways as he can. So what does he need the most? Like, where does he need to grow the most? Because if he grows more in a physical sense, if he grows more in a spiritual sense, if he grows, he's going to be a better father. So it's a really, really hard question for a number of things, but I've got a handful that I'll throw out there that I just that changed my life. Atomic Habits is a huge. Uh, that's one that I put in all of our programs.
Have you
Atomic.
worked with I know you've done a lot of work at Stanford. Have you worked with BJ Fogg, which so much of James Clear's work came from BJ's work? I was just curious.
I haven't worked with BJ. No, I didn't even come across BJ actually while I was there. I came across so many amazing people that a lot of people would know, and I mean, from Huberman to Dweck to um, shoot, even Harbaugh when he was there coaching. Like, I
Yeah.
got to work with so many of them in a number of different ways. But no, I didn't get to go. I didn't get to do anything with BJ at
Just
all.
curious, and by the way, totally, James Clear's Atomic Habits, genius. I mean, and I love the fact he's like me, he's a layperson that just blew away a lot of behavioral scientists with a very easy, take their principles and here's what everybody could do to so
Here
great,
you
great
go.
recommendation.
Super practical, easy to implement. So that's a huge one. One that was impactful for me, partially because of or I guess just where I was at the time of the journey again, which I think that's the beauty of books. There are certain things that are going to impact you more because of what life stage you're in
Mhm.
particular too. But and there was a great movie about it, but it was called Pursuit of Happiness, right? Will Smith,
Yeah.
Chris Gardner, and that book, was phenomenal for me, and it came across at a time that I didn't even have kids, but it was one of the things that made me a better father, even before I had kids, was reading that book, believe it or not. I mentioned Tyler Durden earlier, Fight Club, if I'm honest, changed my life. That changed my perspective. The book, before the movie, the book, changed my life, changed my perspective on a lot of ways on how much I care, not in a flippant way, not in an audacious way, not in any way that I wanna say lacks, the necessary humility, but in a way of understanding, like, the amount of, emotional energy that we will give to other people's perception of us, even when it's not the reality, was a little astounding, and I had to go to war with my own ideas on that, and so that book really put me to war with my own ideas, in a lot of good ways. Mo Gadot's Solve for Happy, another one that I think is wildly simple, but wildly brilliant, and it does it from a father's perspective. It's a father who has lost his son, and this is based on his this is his experience. And so a wildly profound book. The Alchemist does a great, right. I love that book. Um, I learned just as much I learned equally from fiction and nonfiction. But I think there's so many life truths in The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho.
Yeah.
Uh, Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman, I think is wildly powerful. Not enough people have read that and dive into that. People have heard of obviously people have heard of Kobe Bryant. And the whole Mamba mentality. And so Todd was the guy responsible for helping him psychologically develop that Mamba personality and stepping
Mhm.
into that. There's so many applicable things that are there. Gosh, man, Truth About Taxes. Or my friend Sean Briscoe wrote a great book, Truth About Taxes. That has shifted my entire understanding and shifted so many things for our families. There's two tax systems in this country. Most people don't even realize that's a thing. Never mind the fact that nobody utilizes this other system. Most people don't even realize there's another system to use. So I mean, quite literally, we could probably do this for hours. Those are
Yeah.
the first that are coming to mind. I'm sure I'll jump off later and be like, oh my gosh, of course, this one changed my life. And I just didn't say it, but there's so
I get it, man, but that's what I want. I'm hoping that the listeners heard some books that they've never heard before, and also the fact that you see, it took me a while to come around to the fact that fiction could be you could glean a lot of wisdom
heroes,
from fiction. What's that?
hero, hero stories, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned Fight Club. I had my youngest daughter who by the way, I gotta brag on her. So, you've mentioned in one of your talks before that one of the things that employers are facing right now is it's just so hard to hire these young people to
No.
like, whenever I was growing up, I hit the workforce just I'll never forget when I got offered my first quote unquote "real job." Now I worked from the time I was 13 through, put myself through undergrad, and graduate school for that matter, but, I remember when I got my first quote unquote "real corporate job," I was almost in tears and was so thankful I had a job.
Mhm.
Now it's almost like these kids are coming out saying, "You should be thankful that I've decided to show up here, and by gosh, you bet and here are my list of rules for working for you," as opposed to the other way around. But
Yep.
my youngest, who I actually recommended Fight Club to, of
Nice.
course of course, then that put her into a whole Chuck Palahniuk, I can always butcher his last name. She started reading all of his stuff, which, Fight Club's the best, then there's some
Some
crazy stuff,
great
man.
stuff, man. Chuck's a nut.
Oh, his turn of phrase, and as a writer, have you read his, book, Consider This?
No, sir.
Dude, you would love it. You would
Yep.
love it. It's kinda like, Stephen King's book on writing
Yep.
or, Movable Feast that Hemingway did. It's his how-to, right? And it's so cool with giving little tips and tricks, on how to write story. But anyway, I love Fight Club was probably one of those first books for me that I read and was like, "This is basically just kind of an analog version of The Matrix." I mean, it's literally showing how we get sucked into the Matrix, and then we bow to the Matrix by, our IKEA furniture and, kinda like the going back to American Psycho, the Patrick Bateman just over the top, listing Bret Easton Ellis when he lists every single thing that the character's wearing, I would laugh every time Patrick Bateman would describe his outfit when I was reading American Psycho. But these books, they're basically just satire or in The Matrix, a dramatic account of this plastic world that we've all just fallen into. And I know that's always a hard question whenever you're a serious reader to because it's like saying, I don't know, "What's your favorite meal?" Well, it depends on the day and where I
Yeah.
am. It's
Well,
tough.
no, I love but you're right, man. Those 2, that book and The Matrix in particular, and there's this, there's a popular saying, and everybody's heard it, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
I actually don't agree with that statement. I think it's actually more insidious than that. I think the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world to bow down to him, whether they believe in him or not.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
that I think is even more insidious because you've got people that are like, yes, the enemy. And then I look at their actions. And again, I'm like, ooh, and you're playing right along because he's not the boogeyman. He's not because that would be obvious.
Yep,
He's the snake in the garden that's like, yeah, here's all the right answers. And
yep.
also this one that's just gonna move you 1 degree off right there,
Mhm.
and then over long enough time, 2 planes take off at the same place, and they're 1 degree difference, long enough time, they end up in a very different location.
That's
But
right.
you're saying and thinking you're saying all the right things.
Yep.
Like, that's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely, and that brings up another good book that we could talk about, Screw Tape Letters. If you wanna see C.S. Lewis's handbook for how Satan deceives us, go ahead, just pick up and read about some old Uncle Screwtape.
And I'll tell you what, I mean, Napoleon Hill, obviously people, Think and Grow Rich,
Yep.
phenomenal, and not just about wealth building, right? It's just a phenomenal book on life in general. But Napoleon Hill's best work, in my opinion, is Outwitting the Devil. Um,
Yeah.
Phenomenal book by far, in my opinion, by far his best work. And I even lean towards that. As brilliant as Screw Tape is, man, sometimes I find myself going, nah, I like Outwitting the Devil better. I don't either one both must read.
Alright, so now I'm gonna take it to another level because, and like I told you before we got on, I was still sweating like a pig because my heart rate was still up, and so I was afraid I was gonna get on here and be all, like, all pasty faced and shiny before because I'm going through right now, um, the 8 weeks to seal fit Mark Divine's program just for the fun of it, I mean, I wanna do that. What's that?
Mark's a stud.
Oh, dude, he's like a seal monk. He's like if you
Yeah.
take a seal and a monk and you put them in a blender, out comes Mark Divine.
Yep.
Uh, just as and so I'm doing that, and then I've got Ben Greenfield's, I do the ladder program, but, I
Ben,
just
Ben, you're a friend of mine. Great
Ben
guy.
is? Oh,
Yeah, dear friend, man, great guy. Both of his boys are actually in the Apogee Strong Young Men's program.
really? Okay. So he and I have a lot of mutual friends, and he and I have connected in a number of times. I would love to hang out with Ben and do some iron sharpening iron at some point. I think that day will come. I love his warrior spirit, and those are some of the things that I'm doing physically. I literally hit it twice a day, and people
Mhm.
think that it's for I remember I had somebody here recently that I was talking about, being healthy or whatever, staying fit, and they're like, "Oh, are you going to the gym?" And I'm like, I want to punch you in the throat right now. No, I'm not just going to the gym. That's so stupid and trite. This isn't vanity. This is about something much more spiritual or whatever. And you get it. But that's some of the stuff that I'm doing right now. But I want to know what you're doing kind of like physically to keep yourself sharp and kind of and take me through your daily routine, man. What is your warrior morning, whatever you want to call it? What does kind of the day look like for you? Because you're juggling
Yeah.
a lot of stuff.
Oh, there's a lot, man. There's always a lot. And my physical, the physical part of that has evolved for a long time. I was an athlete growing up, and so that's definitely evolved. Definitely went through my bodybuilding phase in my 20s, and then went through like CrossFit phase, and was just everything was CrossFit or die on the physical fitness side. But I grew up as a martial artist too, and so there was a lot of I was a competitive martial artist, and then even as I stopped competing, I was helping guys, a lot of UFC guys with fight camps and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely been this evolution. And part of that has been, being extraordinarily stupid in what I've done too, and hurt myself in a number a number of ways. But now, even as I'm older, I mean, that is a huge component. It's a huge part. I still have a lot of friends in that industry. So Jason Khalipa was a CrossFit Games champion.
Hmm.
Is a dear friend of mine too. So
Stud,
Jason,
stud.
the star man. He does a lot of like he's helped with a lot of my programming of what I'll do from a weights and mobility standpoint. I'll rely a lot on Jason for a lot of that. And he's helping us on the Apogee school side as well, with the physical fitness part. And then as we moved out here to North Carolina, American Top Team has a great gym actually not too far from where we are. And so that's where my boy and I both go. So martial arts will always and forever be a part of my life. So I got the strength and conditioning component from a tactical sense from Jason. And then I continue the martial arts journey through American Top Team with kickboxing and jiu-jitsu that way. So that's the big part of the physical training. I'm always quick to point out too, health is a part of it. We talk about health and fitness, but people tend to just go, okay, cool. So what do you look like, with your shirt off? Like, I heard that. Cool, man. Yeah, I'm 43 and yep, I still have a six pack. Yep, you bet. Like I'm still, under 10% body fat. Yep, great. Hey, how about this? I haven't even gotten as much of as like a cold in the past decade,
Same, yeah.
right? That's more important
That's
to me.
that's that's where it matters. Exactly.
That's where it's important. Like I don't get sick. And that's including being one of American Airlines top 1% of flyers. I mean, I was all over the world for years on end and I didn't get sick. And so that to me is again more important. The mental clarity that I have is more important. The way that I can, at least think through problems enough to be able to, find solutions and at least potential solutions or part-time solutions and be able to articulate myself when I'm, speaking to anybody and everybody. Like those are the things that matter. And that I still have enough energy um, to pour in and be the husband and the father that I need to. So that's it. That's on the physical fitness side. So I don't have a special morning routine other than I've got coffee prepared to go. The coffee pot turns on and the coffee is ready right at the time that I wake up. So I wake up, I go immediately to that, and it's not because like that. This is just my routine. I go there, I down a bunch of water, pour the coffee, and I go straight into my office because I'm the only one up at that time. And I got this from friend Craig Ballantyne, and so I go straight to the most important task of the day, whatever the most important work task is. I go straight to it. I will get more work done before noon my time than most people will do in 2 days. I just go straight to the tasks at hand. Uh, Afternoons are when I'll reserve things for the workouts, and then I'll take on things that are less focus that require less focus. So in the afternoons is where I'll schedule the majority of my one-on-one coaching calls or the podcasts that I'll do. I'll try to do 4 to 5 podcasts a week as a guest. I'll host the mentorship calls. Those things are majority in the afternoon. Every day is a little different depending on the mentor calls and things like that we have. But from an overall standpoint, that's really it. And then the early evenings are where, I'll go to pick my daughter up from my oldest is 12. I'll go pick her up from work or go watch her at her horse lessons. The 10-year-old will go take her to gymnastics. She has competitive gymnastics in the evening. So we'll go there. Tonight I'll go to gymnastics and I'll go to kickboxing for my son. We'll do all that stuff at night. And then the end of the night, that last hour or so is I want to make sure, I see my wife all throughout the day, but we want to make sure we have time where it's just her and I connecting. And that's really it. 7 days a week. I don't change. There's no weekends. We stay up to this hour. Same bedtime, same uptime, all the time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the things too that there's a magical superpower to that. Once you just decide this is my routine. You mentioned something there too. It's one of the reasons, as far as just want to be clear-headed, a better decision maker, and going back to the identity-based habits is that's why I personally put down alcohol completely. Is
Mhm,
I don't think there's anything wrong. I always tell people there's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine, whatever you want. I mean, it's not a scruples thing. But for me, just whenever I wanted to assume this identity of just trying to completely optimize my mind, my body, and everything to the highest degree possible, kind of like that John Wooden coaching style of coaching myself to play to the as close to my full potential
mhm,
as possible. It just didn't fit into that.
yeah,
And I think that that's one of the things that it's so cool to have conversations like this because a lot of people they see the things that we do and they're again, I hate to keep harkening back to the matrix, but their mind is the only reason why you would do any of that is to be an Instagram celebrity, to look good at the beach, just all they don't even understand that no, it's going back to the factory reset. It's
yeah,
getting back to operating the way we were supposed to operate in at the best at the highest level. And if you're
mhm,
going to do that, it requires work and everything. But I guarantee you, I could ask you this. I know the answer. It feels good, right? I mean, you feel better even though we do all this crap. It feels better,
and that's objectively true. Like, it feels better. I don't even do, quote unquote, cheat meals anymore.
right?
Just as when I do, I don't like the way I feel. I don't like the sluggishness. I don't like the lack of mental clarity. I don't like feeling like I'm not in control of my mood. I don't like it. So I don't even have what I know to be meals that don't sit well with me. I just don't do it. I don't want any chance, and that's has nothing to do with anybody else's perception of me. It's how I feel so that I can operate to do what I'm here to do. I'm not here to live a mediocre life. I'm not here to be a victim. I'm not here to be sad. I'm not here to be depressed. I'm not here to wish my relationships with my wife and kids were better. I could give a rip about Instagram or any other thing. If I never do I could Kaiser Soze out of this whole thing right now where people were like, I remember that guy existed. And that's fine. I got my wife and kids. I'm solid, man. I'm all good. Right. I'm here to do what I want to do with who I want to do it when I want to do it, and I want to do that feeling as good as I possibly can. Period.
Amen, brother. Amen. All right. So being respectful of your time, dude, I could go on again with this iron sharpening iron all day long. And I do hope, Matt, this isn't the last time you come on the show. I definitely don't want this to be the last time that we visit, but let people know because your work is important. It is so on point. Where can people find you? Where can they get the most from your resources? And if there's anything that this audience can do to support what you're doing, brother, let's have it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. So, by the time this airs, hopefully we'll have everything we're doing under one umbrella. We have like 38 URLs right now. So apogeestrong.com will be where everything is, APOGEE strong.com. You can follow on Instagram at Apogee Program. You can find me just at my name at Matt Beaudreau, most active probably on Instagram, but I'm on, most every platform. You can reach out to me directly if you got a question, Matt at apogeestrong.com. I'll usually batch emails and do those a couple times a week. So might take a few days, but I'll get back to you on that. Those are all great places to go. And if you're like, hey, we love what's going on and you want to support the mission, we've got a lot of things we're putting together for scholarship programs. We have a foundation, a 501c3 foundation that all goes towards scholarships. So that's at apogeestrongfoundation.org. And even the payment processing system that we're setting up that'll take the place of Stripe for any organizations that want to switch from Stripe to Apogee payments. The beauty is where Stripe makes their money on that 3% margin, we'll still have that margin, but that money goes into the foundation as a scholarship program too. So not only do you know that we're not going to shut you down because we believe in freedom and sovereignty, but um, that same money you would be paying to an organization will go towards helping people. So
Awesome, brother. Well, Matt Beaudreau, this has been a blast, dude. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and my audience, brother. And Godspeed, man. Keep doing what you're doing.
back at you, brother. Appreciate it. Honors mine.
All right, thanks, man.